Welcome back, warriors, to a world where fate is rewritten. The decades-long war between humans and demons finally came to an end, leaving behind a blood-soaked legacy etched into history as the Age of Destruction. And on the day humanity's victory was recorded, a severed head was hung at the gates of the iron-blooded Baskerville family. Vikir van Baskerville, the illegitimate son of Marquis Hugo Baskerville, the hound who had carried the family's sins in shadow, crossing hundreds of deadly missions of espionage, assassination, and betrayal, only to be discarded as a demon spy and executed on a false charge. Yet as his teeth clenched in rage and his heart screamed for life, fate twisted back upon itself, and a baby's cry echoed to the Baskerville nursery, where Hugo coldly judged his newborn children as useless until his gaze stopped on one silent infant. Vikir, a bastard barely 100 days old, lying still like a corpse, and finding the silence preferable to noise, he ordered all the children cast into the cradle of swords, a brutal, right where infants crawl through a labyrinth of blades toward the river Styx, whose waters hardened the body like steel but favored only the first to arrive. Amid crying, bleeding, and helpless crawling, Hugo watched with contempt until astonishment erupted among the knights. For through spiraled knives a single child forced himself straight ahead, carving a path through flesh and blood, refusing the safer route, crawling onward with torn skin, bruised knees, and bleeding hands, driven by a will far beyond infancy, until he emerged alone and plunged into the Styx, staining the river red, gripping the railing so hard it cracked as Hugo watched in agitation. And when the child failed to surface and the knights peered into the depths in terror, they delivered the words that finally twisted the iron-blooded swordsman's lips into a grin. Vikir was not merely soaking the river, he was drinking it. Vikir awoke in a place so desolate that even hell would seem kinder, and the moment he sensed a familiar stench of blood and decay, he realized with grim certainty that he had returned to the Baskerville estate, his body now frail, empty of mana, and barely 100 days old. Recognizing this impossible regression, he swore that this life would not end as a disposable hound while recalling the path of his previous life. Awakening mana at 8, reaching mediocrity by Baskerville standards, becoming a blade in the dark through assassination and war, carrying the empire to victory, how his achievements had been stolen, how he had been used to elevate others before being executed for knowing too much. He waited patiently, observing even the small injustices of the nursery, until an unnoticed box was placed beside his cradle. Releasing 2 bloody mambas meant to silently erase him, as so many gifted children had been erased before, revealing that the enemy's hand reached even into this room. Without panic, he acted, using the hardened body granted by the river Styx and the mana he alone possessed, seizing the snakes by their necks and crushing them with calm precision, killing them before they could strike. And when the nursery erupted the next morning in shock and fear, the household answered with executions, tighter guards, and unanswered questions. Yet Vikir needed no answers, for he already understood the rules of this place. And as he lay back in his cradle holding the corpses of the snakes, he did nothing but wait for time to pass, for strength to grow, and for the moment when the debt of blood would finally be repaid. 8 years passed, and Vikir van Baskerville, now 8 years old, sat through his lessons with calm precision, answering questions about sword ranks with ease while the other children parroted simple conclusions, their praise of Hugo de Baskerville as a sword master only deepening the quiet resentment in his chest. Unlike them, Vikir already understood the gap between talent and reality, and though tutors marveled at his intellect, and the family's interest in Fong Castle had begun to center on him, he remained unmoved, measuring only his own progress. Already an advanced sword expert at an age when, in his previous life, he had not even sensed mana, aware that this level was still mediocre by Baskerville's standards and far from enough to face Hugo, he resolved to reclaim all his former strength before his coming-of-age ceremony, a resolve tested when 3 direct lineage triplets confronted him after class, mocking his birth and past feats, while flaunting a crude manosphere as proof of their superiority, recalling how these same brothers had once stolen his food, sabotaged his evaluations, and later hunted him down in the war, the future he intended to seize. Pretending to tremble, he played the role of a helpless child while they mocked him, restrained his limbs, and covered his mouth to suffocate him. Yet Vikir remained perfectly still, enduring minute after minute without resistance, his calm gaze slowly draining the smiles from their faces as time stretched past what any child should survive, until panic crept into their cruelty, and they tried to release him. Too late. Vikir bit down and severed Avero's finger, smiling through blood as terror finally replaced arrogance, and when they attempted to flee, he struck without hesitation, breaking noses, jaws, and teeth with ruthless precision, his body unmoved even when stabbed thanks to the protection of the river Styx, leaving the triplets broken, bleeding, and trembling on the floor, tossing a dagger between them. Vikir delivered his verdict with chilling clarity. Only one brother would leave the room alive, and the choice was theirs, watching in silence as a unity that defined Baskerville's future trident fractured in an instant, proving that even monsters, when broken early enough, learn fear. John Barrymore, the butler who had served the Baskerville family for 4 generations, delivered his daily report to Hugo with practiced calm, moving through territorial disputes and minor affairs until Hugo's interest was finally caught by a single detail. Vikir had ranked first in the written evaluations, followed by rumors of strange omen above Fawn Castle, and, soon after, a violent incident among the children, when Barrymore revealed that the infamous triplets of the direct line had been crippled by a single younger boy. Hugo's curiosity sharpened, and upon learning the culprit was 8-year-old Vikir, he summoned him at once, studying the child with an unfamiliar, measuring gaze that carried expectation rather than contempt. As Vikir sat before him, carefully concealing his mana, Hugo questioned him about the incident, noting not the broken bones but the collapse of the triplets' unity. And when Vikir calmly replied that 3 weak swords were more useless than 1 strong blade, Hugo found himself agreeing, his interest deepening. Pressed further on whether it was wrong to beat his brothers, Vikir answered with disarming simplicity that strength itself could never be wrong, reflecting the ruthless logic of Baskerville more perfectly than any doctrine. And as Hugo watched the child before him, so young, yet already speaking the family's creed more clearly than most, the corners of the sword master's mouth slowly curled upward, amused and intrigued by what had begun to grow under his roof. Vikir understood Hugo better than anyone, a cold-blooded man who saw people only as weapons and believed weakness itself was a sin. When Hugo pressed him about guilt and forgiveness, Vikir responded with words Hugo himself had once spoken, that forgiveness was merely an excuse for the powerless, which sent Hugo into rare, booming laughter and earned Vikir's first true acknowledgement as a worthy child of Baskerville, rewarded with access to the family's food stores and a quiet command not to lose to the direct descendants, led underground by Barrymore, revealing that his desire had nothing to do with indulgence at all, but with preparation, patience, and a long game already unfolding far beyond the understanding of those watching it. The midterm practical exam of the Baskerville family began by abandoning 8- and 9-year-old children in the harsh LaRouge Mountains, where survival, betrayal, and monster hunting were rewarded according to Hugo Baskerville's ruthless point system. Yet while most children immediately turned on one another, Vikir remained unmoved, fully familiar with the terrain from his past life. Ignoring provocation and fear, he waited calmly as others mocked him, aware that this test was not about reckless violence but preparation. And as the bell rang to signal the start, Vikir chose not to compete like a child. As chaos spread to the mountains with children fighting, ambushing, and eliminating one another for points, Vikir deliberately removed himself from the competition, slipping to the edge of the restricted zone and digging a hidden pit beneath a dead tree, surviving comfortably while Guardian Knights dismissed him as a coward. Once their attention faded, he crossed into Forbidden Zone and tracked a hellhound, exploiting its weakness to water and canine vulnerability to chocolate by feeding it bloody beans, crippling and killing the monster alone, absorbing the strength it released, and dragging its corpse back, only to realize too late that hellhounds never hunt alone. Surrounded by a pack of hellhounds, Vikir stood unfazed, ready to slaughter them one by one with the sword he carried. Yet before the hunt could begin, the pack fled in terror, revealing a far greater presence. Cerberus, the 3-headed guardian of hell itself, wounded but still overwhelming. Forced to fight, Vikir revealed his true level as an advanced sword expert, clashing with the monster, using refined Baskerville's sword techniques until his weapon shattered and retreat became inevitable. Drawing Cerberus straight toward the trap he had prepared days earlier beneath the mountain soil. Cerberus plunged into Vikir's concealed pit, impaled by countless wooden spears soaked in bloody bean toxins. Yet even wounded and poisoned, the monster fought on until Vikir exhausted every resource, finishing the battle with a final poison strike using venom taken from the bloody mamba. After staggering forward exactly 7 steps, Cerberus collapsed and died, leaving Vikir alone amid the wreckage of a monster no child should ever face, proving that the practical test was never a trial of survival for him, but a hunting ground where a reborn predator quietly dismantled hell itself. After killing Cerberus, Vikir abandoned its massive corpse and followed the lingering trail of demonic energy deeper into Forbidden Forest, correctly deducing that such a gatekeeper could only exist near a hidden dungeon. Tracing its tracks, he discovered an ancient crypt long forgotten by the family, where ruby light illuminated a stone chamber containing the skeletons of twin Baskerville ancestors and a carved riddle. 1 comes in, 2 come in, 1 goes out, that had driven them to madness and fratricide, yet yielded nothing. Realizing their fatal misunderstanding, Vikir shattered the ruby that cast the shadows apart, plunging the chamber into darkness and opening the true final passage, where his hand found a sword embedded in stone bearing an inscription naming only Baskerville blood as its bearer. At the moment, he recognized the name engraved upon it. Vikir understood he had uncovered not an empty dungeon, but a forgotten artifact of catastrophic value, one that history itself had buried too early. The sword embedded in the dungeon revealed itself as Beelzebub, the gluttonous fly, a legendary artifact born from the corpse of a demonic constellation once slain by the first head of the Baskerville family, an existence so dangerous that had later brought ruin when it resurfaced in demon hands during the Age of Destruction. Now claimed by Vikir, Beelzebub fused into his body and immediately awakened an overwhelming hunger, forcing him to feed it with the corpses of monsters, beginning with a hellhound, whose blood granted the blade its first stolen ability, eternal bleeding, confirming Beelzebub's true nature as a weapon that devours lives and steals their powers. When Vikir returned his hidden pit and allowed Beelzebub to feast on Cerberus, the artifact evolved again, gaining hellfire burn and regeneration abilities, revealing both its terrifying growth potential and the heavy price of sustaining it. Assessing his strengthened body, rising mana circles, and the path now opening before him, Vikir realized he had already taken everything La Rogue Mountain could offer, and that the true reward of this trial was not first place in the evaluation, but the beginning of a future where even the Baskerville family, and Hugo himself, would unknowingly hand him the final key to surpassing all limits. After the practical evaluation ended, the Baskerville children returned with monster spoils and an uneasy sense of camaraderie forged through blood and survival. But the true shock came when Butler Barrymore reported to Hugo that 8-year-old Vikir had crossed into Forbidden Zone and single-handedly killed Cerberus, a feat so absurd that even the family had doubted it. Realizing that Vikir had concealed both the corpse and the method with calculated restraint, Hugo recognized not only overwhelming talent but dangerous intelligence, confirming it when Vikir calmly revealed that chocolate was poison to canine monsters and admitted he withheld information because only the family head was his master. Please, Hugo granted Vikir full ownership of Cerberus' corpse and, unusually, allowed him to choose an additional reward, whereupon Vikir requested access to the inner library, an exclusive privilege of purebloods, only to be unexpectedly granted entry and even guided toward an elite sword manual, while Hugo, unaware of the deeper ambition hidden behind the boy's obedient expression, unknowingly opened the path to the greatest betrayal the Baskerville family would ever suffer. Granted rare access to the inner library, Vikir entered a vast, oppressive archive where generations of Baskerville swordsmanship and slaughter were preserved like the memories of caged killers, calmly bypassing the deeper, heavily guarded manuals to briefly absorb the sixth form Hugo had recommended before deliberately turning back to the shallowest shelves everyone ignored. While knights and servants pitted what they believed was a child wasting an irreplaceable opportunity, Vikir searched methodically until he found the true treasure hidden in plain sight, an old, torn, and discarded book titled Lurking Ambush, dismissed as worthless only because its most crucial pages were missing, yet instantly recognized by Vikir as the original foundation of the legendary 10th form, the very swordsmanship that would one day drive Hugo to sacrifice countless hounds in a brutal campaign to restore it. never realizing that the complete knowledge already lived within the mind of the boy now, holding the book. Vikir remembered all too well how this forgotten sword manual resurfaced in his previous life, when a single torn page recovered during a border raid led Hugo to uncover lurking ambush buried among worthless texts, igniting a ruthless campaign to reclaim its missing pages from the other great families at the cost of countless Baskerville lives, including nearly everyone Vikir had grown up with, until he alone survived long enough to gather all 7 fragments and deliver them to his master in exchange for nothing more than hollow praise. Now, standing in the quiet of the inner library with the original book in his hands and every lost page perfectly reconstructed in his memory, Vikir realized the cruel irony. What once chained him to a lifetime of bloodshed was now his alone to claim, and by memorizing the complete truth of the swordsmanship before destroying the book, he would erase Hugo's future ambition at its root and sever the fate that once turned him into nothing more than a disposable hound. After memorizing every word of lurking ambush, Vikir tested the swordsmanship in silence, drawing the first 4 familiar teeth before pushing beyond his former limit to manifest an unstable yet undeniable 5th tooth, proof that the stagnation of his previous life had been broken at last. In that moment, his aura condensed from gas into liquid, and he crossed into the realm of a graduator at only 8 years old, achieving a level he had once reached decades later through endless bloodshed. While realizing that this new swordsmanship, subtle, deceptive, and merciless, was perfectly suited for concealing power and striking only when death was assured. With the knowledge of the complete 10th form now engraved permanently into his mind, Vikir calmly burned the book to ashes, ensuring the greatest treasure of the Baskervilles would vanish from the world forever, leaving its legacy to exist only within him as he prepared to step back into Hugo's sight, already calculating how much strength to reveal and how much to hide as he began shaping a future that would never again belong to the hounds of hell. Summoned by Hugo after leaving the inner library, Vikir calmly answered questions that hinted at more than childish impressions, prompting Hugo, against his own reason, to test his son's true limits in Performance Hall, where an 8-year-old stood alone before an audience of the entire family and faced a live orc. With flawless footwork and terrifying precision, Vikir dismantled the monster without hesitation, severing its limbs before revealing the unmistakable glow of aura at his blades. Tip, shocking all present as he manifested the hallmark of a sword expert in an age thought impossible even among Baskervilles. As the orc bled helplessly and fell to a single stabbing fong, murmurs of disbelief spread through the crowd, while Hugo, masking his satisfaction behind cold scrutiny, searched for flaws and excuses rather than praise, until Vikir's quiet confidence shattered the moment entirely. Looking up at his father and the gathered hounds, he asked a single question that made the hall fall silent, bearing not just his teeth but his ambition. Was there anything stronger than an orc? Hugo accepted Vikir's challenge and ordered a stronger opponent brought forth, revealing a massive troll long kept as a test subject, an immortal, regenerating monster far beyond what any child should face. As the restraints were removed, the arena felt tense, yet Vikir showed no fear. Instead of reckless aggression, he fought with cold patience, evading blows, draining the troll's stamina, and exploiting its own momentum. What looked like youthful daring was, in truth, the calm judgment of a veteran warrior. When the troll finally charged in desperation, Vikir struck decisively. The first fong pierced deep, tearing open the neck, but the monster endured, just as expected. Then, abandoning restraint, Vikir revealed more of his true power. His aura condensed, sharpened, and manifested again. A second fong followed the first, unmistakable and lethal. Before the eyes of the entire Baskerville family, an 8-year-old boy displayed the mark of an intermediate sword expert. The troll collapsed, its massive body crashing lifelessly to the ground. Silence consumed the arena. Hugo stood frozen, realization dawning at last. This was no mere prodigy. Vikir had crossed a line, baring his teeth not as a promising hound, but as a future predator capable of shaking the very hierarchy of Baskerville itself. A week has passed since that incident, as Vikir ate his tasteless haggis, aware that it revealed just enough to secure leverage without drawing too much danger. Fate intervened in the form of House Morg. Hugo received a visit from Morg Adolf, a calculating delegate cloaked in courtesy. who came under the guise of a friendly annual tournament but carried the unresolved tension of the contested ruby mine. Adolf unveiled Morg's own prodigy, Morg Camus, an 8-year-old magical genius whose brilliance rivaled Vikir's, and her bold accusation of theft shattered the room's fragile civility. The child's fearless demand for the return of the ruby mine exposed a festering conflict between the two great houses, forcing Hugo to confront not only Morg's political pressure, but the emergence of another once-in-a-century monster. And as Camus stood defiantly before him, eyes blazing like rubies, it became clear that the collision between Baskerville's fangs and Morg's magic had only just begun. Camus' blunt accusation froze the room, her childlike voice tearing open a political wound both houses had long concealed beneath formality. What began as an embarrassing outburst soon revealed uncomfortable truth, as Hugo and Morg Adolf were forced to confront the reality of the disputed ruby mine, an underground vein that bound Baskerville's territory to Morg's greed for magical resources. While the adults sparred with veiled words and restrained hostility, Camus stubbornly pressed a demand, exposing how deeply the issue affected Morg's research and pride. Hugo, irritated by being cornered by a child yet unwilling to yield authority, was moments away from letting the situation spiral, until Vikir intervened. With a single innocent yet cutting remark, he redirected the confrontation, challenging Morg's claim with calm logic rather than emotion. His presence shifted the balance of the room, transforming the argument from childish provocation into a clash of ideologies. In that moment, it became clear to everyone present that the true battlefield was no longer the ruby mine itself, but the minds and fangs of two 8-year-old prodigies who were already shaping the future rivalry between Baskerville and Morg. The room fell into tense fascination as Vikir and Morg Camus faced each other, two once-in-a-century geniuses locking gazes while the adults looked on in silence. Vikir instantly recognized Camus, not as a child, but as the future Ironblood Empress who would one day rule House Morg with unmatched magical power and ruthless elegance. Yet in the present, she was still 8, proud, sharp-tongued, and unused to resistance, especially from someone her own age. Their exchange quickly turned into a battle of logic, with Camus presenting meticulous arguments over territory and mining rights, only to be met by Vikir's blunt, uncompromising counterpoints that stripped sentiment from the issue entirely. The debate escalated into a vivid demonstration when Camus used a simple physical analogy to prove ownership across borders, confident she had cornered him, until Vikir seized her arm and coldly declared his, turning her logic against her. The sudden shift, backed by an overwhelming pressure born not of mana, but of lived slaughter, rattled even Hugo and Adolf. For Camus, the shock was far deeper. Pulled face-to-face with a boy who neither flattered nor feared her, she experienced confusion and embarrassment she had never known before. What began as an argument over land ended as a clash of dominance, signaling that their rivalry would not be settled by words alone. Vikir's sudden threat shattered the fragile balance of the room, driving Camus into genuine fear for the first time in her sheltered life, only for the tension to snap when the dagger revealed itself as a harmless toy. The adults were left stunned, Adolf humiliated by his own misjudgment, Hugo barely suppressing amusement at how neatly his rival had been cornered. What appeared to be childish recklessness was, in truth, calculated control, and Hugo smoothly seized a moment to redirect the discussion back to politics. The confrontation dissolved into uneasy laughter and wounded pride, but its aftershocks lingered as the annual tournament began, with all attention drawn not to the older contestants, but to the two 8-year-olds now placed in a real battle. When the match started, Camus unleashed a prodigious talent, casting multiple spells at once with overwhelming brilliance, yet Vikir calmly dismantled her efforts, closing distance, breaking defenses, and humiliating her with effortless precision rather than brute force. Each exchange chipped away at Camus' composure, turning genius into frustration, until her fury finally boiled over. What unfolded was no longer a contest of magic and sword, but a lesson, one that left Camus shaken, exposed, and forced to recognize that for the first time in her life, she had met someone who stood above her. As Camus' fury spiraled out of control, she hurled her magic wildly, abandoning strategy for sheer emotion, while Vikir calmly guided the flow of the battle toward the edge of the arena. His movements were deliberate, almost careless, as he allowed her to chase him into the chaos created by an adjacent duel. when an explosion from the neighboring match tore through the air. The consequences fell squarely on Camus. Her clothes burned away, her dignity stripped in an instant before the crowd could even understand what had happened. Overcome by humiliation and fear, she collapsed inward, no longer the proud prodigy of Morg, but an 8-year-old child facing shame she had never known. In that moment, Vikir stepped forward, draping his robe over her without hesitation, shielding her from prying eyes and ending the fight without another blow. When the dust settled, it was Vikir who stood injured and exposed, Camus who stood protected, and the crowd that realized the battle had ended not with victory or defeat, but with an unspoken concession. The hostility between them dissolved into stunned silence, and for Camus, the match was over, not because she was beaten by force, but because she had been disarmed in spirit. After the duel, Hugo quietly drew Vikir aside, speaking to him not as a distant patriarch, but as someone testing successor's judgment, and Vikir answered with cold clarity, advising that Baskerville relinquish the ruby mine to Morg in exchange for strategic advantage rather than pride. Hugo immediately grasped the intent, to let Morg shoulder the cost of guarding the dangerous frontier, while Baskerville expanded its territory by driving monsters and barbarians outward, and he approved with unmistakable satisfaction. What followed was no longer a children's quarrel, but a reshaping of power between houses, resolved through calculation rather than force. Morg Adolf, unsettled yet impressed, pushed further, floating the idea of a marriage pact to bind the two families, only for the discussion to spiral into sharp words, wounded pride, and Camus' fierce declaration that she would never marry anyone weaker than her mother. When Adolf tested Vikir directly, attempting to intimidate him with status and pressure, Vikir answered with calm indifference, refusing to rise to provocation. The moment made one thing clear to everyone present. Despite his age, Vikir was no longer a piece to be moved, but a player shaping the board, and the Morg family left Baskerville fully aware that a far more dangerous presence had begun to bare its teeth. 7 years after his childhood duel, Vikir stood among the newly graduated hounds of Baskerville, watching his peers complete their final hunt under Staffordshire's command, while he alone had already slain a greater ox bear in silence, his strength far beyond what the others could grasp. As the young warrior spoke excitedly about knightly orders and futures on the battlefield, their gazes inevitably turned toward Vikir, whose reputation as a prodigy had grown impossible to ignore, even though he himself remained detached, already thinking several steps ahead. Summoned by Hugo after graduation, Vikir learned that his path would diverge sharply from the expendable hounds. Instead of being thrown into Black Mountains, he was appointed deputy magistrate of Underdog City, a lawless metropolis abandoned by corrupt officials. Hugo's decision was deliberate, power paired with responsibility, politics instead of slaughter, placing Vikir closer to heart authority, while others bled on the frontier. Accepting without hesitation, Vikir recognized his role as both a test and an opportunity, a safer battlefield where influence could sharpen his hidden claws. As he left Hugo's office with his appointment sealed, he understood that this was only the beginning. To prove his worth quickly, secure his position, and prepare for the greater stage that awaited him beyond Baskerville. Vikir arrived early at Underdog City Hall and quietly took his seat as the new deputy magistrate, startling the staff who mistook him for a visiting child, only to panic once his appointment letter was revealed. Ignoring the superficial welcome and the expectations of indulgence placed upon him, he immediately began reviewing the city's records, quickly grasping that while Underdog's laws were harsh on paper, corruption and underground crime thrived due to selective enforcement. Instead of belittling the long-serving clerk Chihuahua Baskerville, an outsider himself, Vikir treated him as a partner, acknowledging his local knowledge and administrative experience, which earned genuine trust. With calm certainty, Vikir declared that the existing laws would remain unchanged, but announced he would add a single new law, one designed not to appease criminals or impress elites, but to expose and uproot the city's hidden rot. As festivities and vices bloomed outside in anticipation of exploiting the inexperienced ruler, Vikir watched from above, already planning to use the very bait of greed and lawlessness to draw out Underdog City's corruption and crush it at its core. In the heart of Underdog City, where citizens long believed that laws existed only to protect the powerful, Vikir publicly unveiled his authority by standing alone in the central square and calmly reminding the crowd of the brutal laws that had always existed but were never enforced equally. mocked for his youth and silence, compared unfavorably to his own subordinates, and drowned in jeers and resignation. Vikir endured it all without response until the moment he drove a small wooden stake into the ground. Declaring a new special law, he announced that anyone who pulled out the stake would receive an ever-increasing reward. First 100 million gold, then 1 billion, then 10 billion. Each escalation silencing laughter and replacing ridicule with fear and hesitation. When no one dared move, a poor, desperate flower girl named Judy stepped forward and easily pulled the stake free, triggering panic as the crowd expected her execution. Instead, Vikir placed a massive sack of gold before her and fulfilled his promise without hesitation. In that instant, as 10 billion gold gleamed before the stunned city, Vikir demonstrated that Baskerville's law was no longer distant or hollow, or exactly as spoken, proving that in Underdog City, justice would no longer depend on status, fear, or privilege. The story of the girl who earned 10 billion gold by pulling a single stake spread through Underdog City like wildfire, shattering long-held cynicism and restoring faith in laws once believed to be empty threats. Crime plummeted almost overnight as citizens realized that Baskerville law was no longer distant or selective, but immediate and absolute, rewarding obedience as surely as it punished defiance. Within City Hall, Chihuahua Baskerville watched in awe as Vikir calmly explained that laws only function when people believe in them, then began marking a city map with precise certainty, identifying every den of corruption, illegal guild, and criminal network hidden within Underdog shadows. Drawing on memories from his previous life, Vikir laid out a ruthless yet methodical plan to seize black money, dismantle underground power structures, and redirect stolen wealth into the public treasury, all while sharpening his own influence. As word spread of backlash from the so-called Youth Self-Governance Committee, the privileged offspring of corrupt local elites, Vikir merely leaned back and smiled, fully aware that the first to complain were always the ones who had benefited most from rot, and that the bait he had laid was already drawing the city's most dangerous parasites into the open. In the heart of Underdog City, the decadent social club known as Burning Suspension served as a playground for the city's second and third generation elites, where obscene wealth flowed as freely as champagne and cruelty was treated as sport. Believing themselves untouchable under Baskerville's distant rule, the 7 young masters who controlled the Youth Autonomy Committee mocked law and order, funded their excess through illegal slave trafficking, and planned to humiliate the newly appointed deputy magistrate, as they had done to countless officials before him, only to have their arrogance shattered when a quiet boy slipped into their private room and revealed himself as Vikir Van Baskerville. Without raising his voice, Vikir crushed their guards, exposed the gulf between their imagined power and his real one, and demonstrated absolute control by destroying their champagne tower with a single touch, turning ridicule into terror. When they attempted to retreat behind false loyalty and flattery, Vikir made the hierarchy unmistakably clear. They were not masters testing an official, but dogs who had mistaken their leash for freedom. And from that moment on, Underdog City's underworld understood that the rules had changed and that the boy enforcing the law would not bend, bargain, or forgive. The arrogance of Underdog City's native elites collapsed overnight when the 7 masters who had ruled the shadows were publicly executed according to Baskerville law, their severed heads displayed in the central square beneath the very statues they had mocked for years, sending a shockwave through a city long accustomed to justice bending for the powerful. Citizens who had expected quiet settlements and symbolic punishment instead witnessed absolute enforcement, as crimes once ignored, human trafficking, illegal finance, gambling, and corruption, were punished without exception, proving that wealth and lineage no longer granted immunity. In the dungeon below City Hall, the broken masters realized too late that Vikir's cruelty was not impulse but policy, a calculated purge meant to erase their influence entirely. And as he calmly announced their execution and the coming extermination of their criminal networks, fear replaced entitlement across Underdog City. From that day on, the city understood a single truth. The law was no longer distant or selective, and under Vikir Van Baskerville, crime would be answered not with negotiation but with finality. Under the cover of night on the outskirts of Underdog City, black tents rose over a deserted lot as masked nobles and wealthy figures gathered for an illegal slave auction, a marketplace where displaced barbarians, kidnapped commoners, and fallen nobles were reduced to merchandise. Inside, amid smoke and murmurs, objects, beasts, and humans were traded with equal indifference, their suffering treated as spectacle for those who believed power erased all distinctions. Rare relics and a dead infernal beast drove prices sky high. But the true frenzy erupted when living slaves were brought out, men and women broken by chains and drugs, their despair only fueling the crowd's excitement. Even so, a feral barbarian girl, too fierce and defiant to be useful, failed to draw a single bid and was dragged away as worthless. Just as the auction threatened to lose momentum, the MC revealed the final item, a calm, handsome boy in heavy restraints whose mere presence silenced the hall, and as torchlight illuminated his face, desire and greed gripped the audience at once, signaling that the night's most dangerous bidding had just begun. The moment the boy stood under the light, the auction hall fell into stunned silence, his striking appearance and unnerving composure instantly captivating nobles who moments ago had treated human lives as disposable goods. Desire quickly turned into a frenzy as bids leapt from hundreds of millions into billions, until Baron Gambino crushed all opposition with overwhelming wealth and claimed the boy as his prize. Drunk on power and entitlement, the Baron immediately treated his purchase as property, crossing a line he never should have touched. In that instant, the illusion shattered. Vikir tore apart his restraints as if they were paper and repaid the humiliation with ruthless precision, killing Gambino and his guard before the crowd could even process what was happening. Panic spread as mercenaries and knights surrounded him, only to recoil when his blood-red aura revealed the truth. This was a gradient, a killing force far beyond their reach. When escape became impossible, Vikir revealed his final card, summoning 100 pit bull knights of Baskerville, who descended like executioners from the shadows and erased the auction house in moments, transforming the den of corruption into a slaughterhouse and marking the end of Underdog City's slave market in a single night. With the pit bull knights unleashed, Vikir's plan reached its conclusion as the true core of Underdog City's underground economy was torn out in a single, merciless sweep, proving that corruption could not survive once its protectors were exposed. Backed by Hugo's trust and temporary command over Baskerville's most feared knighthood, Vikir ordered a ruthless purge. Those who resisted were executed without hesitation, while even those who surrendered were crippled to ensure they could never flee or retaliate. Within minutes, the auction house was reduced to silence, its power brokers dead or captured, their ledgers and wealth seized as evidence and tax revenue for the city. As Chihuahua watched in awe, realizing the war on crime had ended almost as soon as it began, Vikir had already moved on, slipping away from the battlefield to secure proof, confiscate hidden assets, and quietly dismantle what remained of the network. In the aftermath, Underdog City stood irrevocably changed, its shadow economy shattered overnight, while the name Vikir van Baskerville became synonymous not with authority, but with inevitability, law that would be enforced without compromise or delay. The fall of Burning Suspension marked the final severing of Underdog City's rotten core, as Vikir personally burned the infamous club to the ground and displayed the severed heads of its most decadent patrons before the public, leaving no doubt that privilege offered no shelter from the law. When dawn came, he stood alone in the square and declared that caste meant nothing before justice, a simple statement that ignited overwhelming public support and crushed remaining dissent. Though the 7 native families protested in desperation, their resistance collapsed the moment Vikir tied their son's crimes to the Empire's most unforgivable offense, illegal slave trading, forcing even the imperial court to stand silent. What followed was absolute ruin. Properties confiscated, families erased, and generations of corruption uprooted without mercy. With the old powers destroyed, honest officials, scholars, and commoners rallied behind Vikir, while wrongful convictions were overturned. Employment surged, and the city's economy stabilized using wealth reclaimed from crime. As Underdog City transformed at an unprecedented pace, Vikir calmly returned to governance, drafting laws with surgical precision and reshaping society itself, before turning his attention to one final loose end still breathing in the depths of the dungeon. On a moonless night, Vikir descended alone into the deepest dungeon beneath City Hall, where the last remaining prisoner waited in silence. Senro Sindiwendi, the former secretary of Baron Gambino and the hidden architect behind his rise. Rather than interrogate her with force, Vikir offered freedom in exchange for honesty, and when she warned him that his ruthless rule lacked virtue and would one day turn the world against him, he listened without anger, finding her advice aligned with his own long-term plans. True to his word, he released her, but before she left, Vikir revealed the buried truth behind the destruction of House Morg, exposing how the 7 native families had engineered its downfall and how their final confessions had been written in blood within the dungeon walls. When Cindy Wendy was confronted with undeniable proof, corpses, apologies, and the weight of justice already delivered, her hatred finally found clarity, not absolution. Vikir apologized on behalf of Baskerville itself, acknowledging a sin he could not erase. In that shared silence of grief and understanding, an unspoken pact was formed. As Cindy Wendy walked free, she left behind a single promise that would shape the future. No matter where Vikir went or what he chose to become, he would never again lack resources, for he had gained a sponsor forged not in greed, but in truth and vengeance. If you enjoyed the story, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next chapters.